The window was open just enough to let in the cool night air. With it came the distant smell of popcorn and cotton candy, a sickly sweet concoction that I had grown used to. The far-off giggles and excited screams of children blended with the ever-growing whimpers of Sheridan Conrad. I hadn't seen her for some time, and I'd almost forgotten how annoyingly high-pitched her voice was until she started talking.
"Please,"
she whined, making the hairs in my ears shrivel.
"Abby, please, I'm sorry."
She's sorry, I thought to myself, giggling as I unraveled my contorted body. Well, one thing's for sure, she's going to be. I've always been flexible. Granted, every child has some sort of elasticity to their bodies in order for them to grow, but I was different. I could bend, move, and twist in ways that other people called abnormal. On play dates, you could find me with my toe shoved into my ear and my laughing voice talking into the heel of my foot, using it as a makeshift telephone when there were no other toys to play with. On the playground at recess, you could see me practically fold my body in half in order to find the perfect hiding spot between the slide and the playhouse. It wasn't until the school talent show that my gift turned into a curse. I thought it was cool that I could so easily move my body in ways that others couldn't, that I could replicate the rhythm of the ocean through the flesh of my skin, waving and flipping as wild as the sea. Apparently, I was the only one that thought this way, and that word came back. Abnormal. Abnormal Abby. I was pushed, locked in bathroom stalls, spit on, the works. Children can be cruel when they are faced with something that they don't understand, but it's even worse when they hear it coming from their parents. The parents complained that I was craving attention, that I was distracting and a nuisance. I wasn't trying to do anything, it's just how I was. I felt more comfortable walking on my hands instead of my feet. I felt more comfortable sitting in the splits than I did crisscross applesauce. My parents thought it would be best to put me in gymnastics, let my acrobatics fly where floors turned to mats and chalk stained each blistered hand. But it wasn't right. There were rules and scores and competitions that needed to be won. I didn't want to win. I wanted to perform. The older I got, the more I begged my parents to take me out of school, to let me move away and perform on the streets. Of course, they said no. So, abnormal Abby stayed in school, getting poked and pushed and pelted and punched, until a breeze rolled in, and with it came freshly made popcorn and finely spun cotton candy. I'd never been to the circus before, but as I walked through the arched entrance lined with balloons, it felt like I was returning home. The sounds of children laughing and ringing arcade buzzers engulfed my ears. Flashing lights and velvet curtains lined each new attraction as I passed. The smell of hot, sticky food mixed with the trampled grass seemed to mask every other sense in my body. But there was something else. Something that kept me listening. Something lying deep beneath the fun. The heart of the beast. The roaring engines of each pop-up coaster and the squeak of day-old popcorn carts rolling gently by rumbled underneath the noise. The smell of sweat and grease paint was stifled from the everyday circus goer, but not me. I heard it all, smelled every smell, and relished in the fact that I was home. I opened my eyes to see a man standing in front of me, looking like he'd just stepped out of an old newspaper funny ad. His black and white painted face was decorated with diamonds, almost seeming to clash with his striped shirt. But I didn't mind. His red lips broke out into a smile when my eyes focused on his. He held up his hand, telling me to wait, as he fished around in the back of his pocket and quickly pulled out his closed fist, presenting to me a hidden gift. He flicked his eyebrow up and let out a soundless chuckle as I watched. The mime opened his hand, and his eyes traced around the invisible flight path of an imaginary bee. His eyes flicked this way and that, head lolling back and forth as the imaginary bee flew all around my body. I giggled and let my imagination run, hearing the faint buzz of wings flutter from one ear to the other. The mime snatched the bee between his fingers and took out an imaginary string from the breast pocket of his shirt. Quickly, he tied the string around the bee and handed me the other end. I smiled and gladly took my new pet, making my body jerk this way and that, as if the bee were tugging me along with it. The mime laughed a silent laugh, resting his hand over his belly with his mouth wide open. "Of course you would be here," Nancy scoffed, making me tear my eyes away from my new friend. "Freaks of a feather flock together." Her and her gaggle of girls all squawked in laughter, pointing at me and the mime. Nancy, Carson, Bethany, Kate, and way in the back was the high-pitched cackle of Sheridan. I lowered my eyes and gently released the fake string of my new pet. I could hear the faint buzz of the imaginary bee fade away as it flew off into the setting sun, its little string leash disintegrating into the wind. I was back to reality, back to abnormal Abby. As the girls turned to walk away, the mime's face gently seeped back into my vision, his crouching knees folding up under him as he sank eye level with me. He gently lifted my head, and I saw the sadness in my heart mirrored on his face. But once again, there was something hidden. Something deep lay buried behind his eyes. Something that would have scared me if I knew what its name was. Something that I would grow to realize was hate. Not of me, but for me. He snapped upright and grabbed my shoulders, guiding me through the crowd of sticky, screaming children and their yelling parents. I didn't even have time to ask what was happening or to tell him to let me go. I just let the mime steer me through the sea of people. Flashes of faces whizzed past my eyes, some glowing red from arcade games, others bright white from the flashing roller coaster bulbs. My arms brushed up against stuffed animals as the vendors took them down from their hooks, handing the prizes over to the jumping children. Each vendor we passed gave a knowing nod to the mime behind me, their blank faces turning toward me for no more than a second before turning back to their customers with smiles. We walked toward a darkened corner behind a row of garbage cans, and without a second glance, he whisked me away behind one of the velvet curtains. The thick fabric muffled the noise outside, leaving only a gentle hum to settle into my ears. This place was no attraction. It wasn't the funhouse, or the House of Horrors, or the elephant ear stand. It was the break room. A striped tent lined with dimmed yellow lights was splayed before me, and within it were the workers of the carnival, the off-duty clowns smoking their cigarettes, the suited performers with their mascot heads lying in their laps. And, finally, I saw him, the ringmaster. As if he knew I was there, the ringmaster quickly spun around on the balls of his feet, flicking his coattails and grabbing the edges of his jacket around his chest. His spidery legs carried him over in a matter of 3 steps, his face thrown into shadows as he glanced down at me.
Well, well, what have we here?
His silky voice slithered.
A new friend? Or a wandering eye?
I felt the mime's hands gently dig into my shoulders as he pulled me back into his chest, growing oddly protective of me. The ringmaster smiled and rhythmically tapped his fingers against his jacket.
Friend, I see.
He smirked, folding himself over to look me in the face.
And do we have a name, new friend?
I swallowed the lump in my throat and croaked out a shaky, "Abby." The ringmaster tried the name out for himself.
Abby.
His eyes flicked past my shoulder and up at the mime, seeming to ask him a silent question only the black and white dressed man could answer. With a gentle smirk, the ringmaster turned back to me.
And do we have a nickname, Miss Abby?
I felt my head instinctively drop, shielding my eyes from any onlookers that might have been watching. A gloved hand gently lifted my chin and patted my cheek, the thick cotton making a dull thud noise inside my head. The ringmaster tutted, wagging his finger at me with a smile.
There is no room for shame in the circus.
I laughed a bit and cleared my throat, having to speak the words that had hurt me since elementary school.
Abnormal Abby.
There was a lull in the tent as the focus turned toward me. A static seemed to spark about the room, fizzing and hissing against the spotlights and dancing around the hairs on my arms. I thought I had offended them, said something wrong, stepped out of line. The workers all stared, the whites of their eyes glowing at me from the shadowed corners like the reddened ash of their cigarettes. My head snapped to the ringmaster in front of me. The longer I stared into the pits of his eyes, the more sweat began to pool at my hairline, threatening to drip down my face. I shuffled backward, pushing further into the mime, silently hoping to melt through him and out of the tent. I was about to run away when the ringmaster broke out into a laugh.
Oh, is that all?
He bellowed, grabbing back onto his coat.
Dear, we've been called much worse than abnormal. Why, that's a wonderful name.
I felt my brows furrow, partially out of confusion, but mostly out of anger. How dare he say that name was wonderful? Try having it written on a piece of paper and taped to your back for an entire day without knowing it, and having to walk around third grade thinking people were laughing at you just because. Or try having it spray painted on your locker, and every time you washed it off to have it magically reappear the next day. Or get onto the bus and sit in the same seat closest to the door, only to find that name jaggedly carved into the fabric, forever labeling that seat as your spot. I didn't find it wonderful, and I sure as hell didn't need some freak in a red jacket laughing at me about it. As if out of nowhere, he stopped laughing, his head cocked to the side as he studied my face, seeming to read my thoughts as if I were speaking them aloud. The same slick grin crept over his lips as he tapped his fingers along his jacket again, rocking up and down on his heels.
My dear, why would you want to be normal?
He asked. It was now my turn to watch his face squish in confusion.
Who wants to be average, Abby? About as good as everyone else, Abby. That's no fun.
He smiled, throwing his arms out to the side.
Take a look around. No one here is normal.
I let my eyes wander over the tent, landing on performer after performer. At first glance, they seemed normal to me, but the ringmaster's words lifted a veil that had been over my eyes. Now I could see the tent for what it really was. Abnormal. A hulking man quietly sat in a chair, threatening to break its legs just from his pure weight alone. A bearded lady gently brushed through her chocolate locks, both on her head and on her face. A fire eater prepared his flaming sword in the corner, making sure to stretch his neck and clear his throat. And finally, I turned around and looked up at the mime, still protectively holding onto my shoulders. The white face paint hid something I hadn't even noticed before. Thick, raised, bumpy skin. Either scars or burns, I couldn't tell, but I didn't care. He gave me a smile that I couldn't help being infected by. I nodded my head and turned back around to the ringmaster, holding out my hand.
Hi, I'm Abnormal Abby.
The ringmaster's cotton-gloved hand enveloped mine in a firm, reassuring grasp. His lips cracked open, revealing pearly white teeth against his tanned skin.
Welcome to the circus.
And that was it. I was home. That night, I begged my parents to let me stay, to let me join the circus and learn the ways of performing. I tried explaining to them the feeling I got. A feeling that ignited my soul and filled it with purpose, passion, and meaning. My parents either chose to ignore me or genuinely didn't care. Either way, I still ranted, and either way, they still refused. They told me it would be a disgrace if I were to become a carny. They acted as if being a carny was a bad thing, as if it were the same as being a murderer. But no, that would come much later. I begged them, practically threw myself onto my knees and cried,
Let me go! I belong there! I need them! What you need is an education and a productive outlet to subside your erratic behavior.
My mom quipped, removing her glasses from the bridge of her nose, making sure not to mess her perfectly placed hair.
What would we tell the family if you left? Tell them the truth. Tell them I went to boarding school. Tell them I died.
I screamed, fat tears rolling down my cheeks.
I don't care. Just let me go.
I shoved past my parents and ran out the door, ignoring my father's orders to come back. Barefoot and in my pajamas, I sprinted down the street to where the circus was set up. I felt the tears stream down my cheeks as the wind blew on my skin. The blacktop changed to stones and then to grass. My feet touched the trodden lawn and I slipped to a halt against the mud. In place of where the carnival had been was a skeleton. Forgotten screws and poles sat stuck in the earth, unbound ropes gently catching the late-night breeze. Littered wrappers rolled across my toes and got caught up in whatever brush was left alive. They had left, without me. Betrayal was a feeling I'd never thought I would get to experience. I never cared enough about anything for it to betray me. My feet sunk deeper into the muddy blades of grass the longer I stood there, stuck between the imposter of a house behind me and the skeleton of a home in front of me. But through the forgotten rubble of the circus, there was one sliver of hope waiting for me to grab it. A balloon in the shape of a bumblebee gently bobbed in the center of the mud-ridden field. The end of the string was tied around a rock, and I lightly peeled the note from under the stone. Written in the most beautiful cursive were the words, "All in good time, the circus always comes back to town." I smiled and held the note to my chest, trying to breathe in the last bit of home before it got swept away in the wind. I would wait. Days turned to months, and months turned to years, and still the circus had not come back. I was 17 when I almost gave up, deciding that I had missed my chance at the one thing that would have made me happy in life. I was about to go to bed when I heard it. A faint whistle coming from my window. The slightest crack at the bottom allowed wisps of air to creep into my room, beckoning me to come over. I tore open the blinds and threw open the window, instantly smiling as my hair got swept up in the breeze. Popcorn and cotton candy. Through the thicket of trees surrounding my neighborhood, I saw faint flashing lights. Red, yellows, and oranges danced through the leaves and paraded among the starry night sky. They were calling me home. I kicked my leg up onto my sill and slid out the window, dropping onto the freshly manicured front lawn. The blades of chilled grass tickled my feet as I scuttled toward the pavement. My feet slapped against the blacktop as I sprinted toward the lights. A sense of déjà vu washing over me as I repeated the same path I had ran years earlier. The closer I got, the more I realized the full circus wasn't back, just the funhouse. I laughed, my voice dancing in the wind as I left it behind. The laughing clown entrance swallowed me whole as I bolted through the black curtains. A black light glowed around the room, tinting the maze of mirrors an almost blinding shade of blue. I wandered around for a bit, bumping into a sharp mirror every so often. My reflection was spat back at me everywhere I looked, and soon I couldn't even remember where the entrance was. I tried retracing my steps, but I kept bumping into myself. I just kept seeing me, my dark blonde hair that was getting scraggly the longer I let it grow, my ragged sleeping shorts and hole-ridden shirt mocking me every turn. Was this a joke? Was this just another message left for me to find? My heart fluttered, and I gave a shriek of joy as they started appearing one by one inside the mirrors. The bearded lady, the strong man, clowns of all different colors, and finally, my mime. He smiled and waved, making me bump into his reflection. He was somewhere in there, I just didn't know where. I went to turn around and call for him, but I bumped into something else. Something much warmer. The ringmaster stood before me and smiled, hands tapping against his chest. He leaned down a bit, stretching so we were face to face.
So,
he breathed, looking around at the mirrors before smiling back at me.
Are you ready?
That's how I joined the circus. Abnormal Abby could finally live in peace. My parents came looking for me, of course. The very next day, I heard their frantic voices over a police car megaphone just outside the funhouse. I'd spent the entire night there talking to my new friends. Before any of us could move, the ringmaster flung open the black velvet curtains to the funhouse entrance and stepped out into the early morning sun. Red and blue flashing lights assaulted my eyes for a brief moment, but then the curtains swing shut again.
Welcome, one and all.
The ringmaster bellowed, his voice slightly muffled.
I'm sorry to say our attraction is closed for the day. We had a special one-night performance, and I'm afraid you missed it.
Where's our daughter?
I heard my mother shriek.
Where's our Abby?
There was a pause before the ringmaster spoke.
Who?
You know damn well who.
My father barked.
You're all she ever talked about.
That's very flattering.
The ringmaster's voice gave way to a chuckle.
But I have no idea who you're talking about.
Sir,
Another voice, presumably the police officer, spoke up.
we'd like to check your establishment. Is that all right with you?
My breath caught in my throat and my knees almost buckled. They were going to find me. They were going to take me away and never let me come back. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. A firm hand on my shoulder made me jump, and I turned around to see the mime hold a finger to his lips. He tiptoed around the corner, dragging me behind him, and presented a pile of luggage cases. Without a word, I knew what he was saying. Together, we rummaged through the pile, trying to find something that wasn't already filled with clothes, bowling pins, extra swords, or tent poles. The mime held up an empty suitcase, the brown, slouchy leather wrinkling in his hands. I nodded my head and helped him unzip the ancient bag. I carefully put my feet in, folding my legs up into my chest and tucking my chin as far down as I could. I closed my eyes and heard the zipper crunch back into place, throwing me into a darkness deeper than my shut eyes could imagine. I was jostled around a bit, and my bag was stood up against something, either a wall or another bag. I could hear footsteps coming into the funhouse, heeled shoes clacking against the false wood floor. I heard faint muttering and the ringmaster's silky voice, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Then I heard my parents. Not their voices, but their footsteps. My father's heavy footfalls and my mother's frantic scuffles. My hot breath rolled down my legs, steaming up the leather bag and turning my hiding spot into a sauna. Without a warning, my bag was thrown to the side, and I had to bite my cheek to stop from letting out a yelp. The ringmaster's voice lazily danced around the room as he walked over toward my suitcase.
Easy on the merchandise.
He laughed and picked the bag up. The feeling of being weightless sent a shiver down my spine.
Ma'am, she's not in here.
The officer spoke, his shoes leading back out the curtain door.
Let's keep looking around the neighborhood.
But... My mom trailed off, her cracked voice pleading for an excuse to search farther. Mom, I thought, hugging my legs tighter. I hadn't thought about my actions until that moment. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even leave a note. I just slipped out at night and was gone in the morning. Their only daughter. Their shambling feet almost made me call out to them. Almost. I still loved my parents, but they didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. My suitcase was gently set down and a lull fell over the tent. I could hear car doors slam shut from outside, the roar of engines coming to life and a gentle pop of stones being crunched under rolling tires. I counted in my head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi before I heard the slow whine of the zipper. The suitcase lid fell open and I popped out like a springform toy. Surrounded by the smiling faces of the circus workers, I tentatively smiled back and fixed my hair.
Abnormal Abby.
The ringmaster bellowed.
I think we found your act.
And so, the real Abnormal Abby was born. My mime would walk out on stage with a suitcase and a pocket full of tricks. He would perform his act, making the crowds laugh and cheer, before turning toward his magic suitcase. With a silent clap of his hands and a hidden tap of his foot against the suitcase lid, the magic bag would slowly start to unzip by itself, and out popped Abnormal Abby. With a face full of white paint, rosy cheeks, and a black bob wig, I would bend and flip, turning the human body into shapes previously thought unimaginable, stunning the crowd into silence. Finally, No more laughter. The feeling of their eyes watching my every move with such intent gave me a sense of pride I'd never felt before. They had paid to see me. They endured hours of standing in line and sitting in back-aching folding chairs just to watch me do the things I'd been doing since childhood. Sure, sometimes the mime's act carried on a bit long and I was stuck waiting in the suitcase for an extra half hour, the heat from the stage lights warming my insides and making me sweat. But I wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world. I finally found the place I fit in. I thought things couldn't get any better, but I was quickly proven wrong. They started going missing, one after the other. The first one to go was Nancy. The police report circled all around my old neighborhood and even made it to the news. Then Carson went missing, then Bethany. I didn't catch on to what was happening until Kate went missing a month later. I had thought our House of Horror mannequins were looking better than usual, their mutilated forms seeming more realistic than before, their tangled hair thick with blood and other matter covering their drooping faces, shielding the mutilated skin from onlookers. The added stench of copper made the crowds wonder if the blood was real or fake, but as long as the crowds were only wondering and not suspecting, we were going to be okay. There was only one more on our list, and the way things were going, this would be the easiest one. I had decided long before that for this performance I wouldn't wear any makeup. Her house was nestled in the corner of the block, shaded by trees with a big enough yard to swallow up any noise that might be made. We watched her parents drive away, an obvious date night they had planned for months. We waited for the cover of night to stalk our way forward. I stayed in my place, not making a peep. My eager hand shook against my knees as I tried calming my heart, but I couldn't help it. This was almost as good as being on stage. I heard the ringmaster knock on her door 3 times, and shortly after, I heard the heavy wooden entrance open.
What?
Sheridan asked.
Good evening, madam.
The ringmaster greeted.
Today is your lucky day. You've won the raffle for a free show.
I didn't enter any contest.
I could hear her obnoxious gum chewing from inside the suitcase.
Oh.
The ringmaster feigned confusion.
I'm sorry. Would you mind helping me then?
Their voices faded away as the mime carried me off, making a fake trail back to our car. His footfalls changed from clacking on the pavement to soft shuffling in the grass. We'd stalked the house long enough to know her window was always left open. I felt the suitcase get lifted up and over the sill, the change in temperature seeping in through the material. I was gently set down and heard the others hide. I waited, trying not to shake in excitement as I heard the front door slam shut. Her lazy footsteps got louder and louder as she thumped her way back to the bedroom. I saw slivers of orange light come through the teeth of the zipper as she flipped her lamp on, stopping when her eyes unmistakably fell onto my suitcase.
What the?
The lights flipped off again and the door slammed shut, her cry of surprise overpowering the faint click of the door lock.
Who are you? What do you want?
Her voice was cut off, muffled by a gloved hand. I waited a couple seconds before slowly unzipping the suitcase. An agonizingly low rumble emitted from the teeth as they popped out of place, allowing the slightest bit of moonlight to peek in. I heard her heavy breath as I creaked open the lid. A clown tossed her to the ground, her knees landing on the hardwood with a thump. Our eyes briefly met through the crack of the suitcase, and I slowly inched myself out. The window was open just enough to let in the cool night air. With it came the distant smell of popcorn and cotton candy, a sickly sweet concoction that I had grown used to. The far-off giggles and excited screams of children blended with the ever-growing whimpers of Sheridan Conrad. I hadn't seen her for some time, and I'd almost forgotten how annoyingly high-pitched her voice was until she started talking.
Please.
She whined, making the hairs on my ears shrivel.
Abby, please. I'm sorry.
She's sorry, I thought to myself, giggling as I unraveled my contorted body. Well, one thing's for sure. She's going to be. I stepped fully out of my suitcase and shook out my limbs, stretching my neck and flexing my fingers around the glinting weapon in my hand. From the shadows, my friend stepped forward, the other freaks she had most definitely made fun of before. One by one, they started humming the ever-popular Circus song, Entry of the Gladiators. I couldn't help the little pep in my step as I walked forward toward Sheridan. She was the last one. Then we could move on. I bent at my waist, hovering over her tear-streaked face as I smiled, just like the ringmaster had taught me. Her big doe eyes looked up at me, filled with false innocence and remorse. "Please," she whimpered, strings of spittle globbing at her lips. I smiled wider, studying the blade before turning my eyes back toward her. "Welcome to the circus," I greeted, licking my teeth. I couldn't help but join in humming with my friends, relishing in the song that had infected my soul. Abnormal Abby had the last laugh.